Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. I'm Chris Miller, the host of West Virginia Right Now with my co-host,
Wes Thompson.
And we are here to tackle the topic of education. And I'm here with two very, very special people that are near and dear to my heart. One is Dr. Kathy D'Antoni. The other is Andrea Garrett Kiesling. And we are going to tackle this topic that is very, very important for the future of the state of West Virginia. And we want to do it in a very different, avant-garde, forward-thinking way to talk about what the problems are and what the potential solutions are. And that's what we want to make this entire show about, are discussing problems and then also potential solutions. Because if we cannot educate our children, and one, keep them out of things like opiates, and two, make sure that the family unit is intact, and three, make sure that we are providing a flourishing economic opportunity for them here in the state of West Virginia. The problem of losing our young people is going to continue to persist. And so that is why, at the end of the day, everything that goes on with the future of our state is going to start and end with education.
And Chris, I just want to say real quick, one of the reasons I'm excited about today is I plan to learn, and education is something that touches everyone. Doesn't matter what income bracket, what race, what sex, what age. Education affects every child and every family. And I think it might be the paramount topic in the state.
Absolutely. First off, Kathy, do you want to kind of give everybody a little bit of a backstory on yourself and your experience inside of education?
Sure. I don't know that I want to tell it all.
Sure.
But I will. No, I'm just joking. I started teaching when I was 19 years old, and I taught first grade, second grade, and third grade during those 3 years.
So when you were 19, that was 30 years ago, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'm so glad. You are a very dear friend, Chris. So, but that was my passion. I loved education. My family were all educators, so that's really my road, the career road that I chose. But on the way in the years went on, I started thinking, education's not for students. It's for adults. And I was frustrated because I was a teacher and I wanted changes made and I wanted other things to happen, and it just didn't. So I left education and I decided to go into the business world. So the next 20 years of my life, I spent with restaurant owners. I owned 2 restaurants with my brothers. Went in, I owned and operated a television station. I also came back to, we had the restaurants, and then we had a television station and restaurants again. And all the while I kept thinking, maybe if I got a degree high enough, I could come back to education and maybe make some changes. So I started my journey. I came back to Marshall University, got my master's degree, went on, got my doctorate degree, ended up on a journey. I ended up with Associate State Superintendent of Schools. And I was able to make some changes, but not the real changes that I feel need to happen in education.
So I'd love to dig into that in a little bit, but before we do, Andrea, why don't you kind of let everybody know your background in education? Andrea is born and raised in West Virginia, went away, and has now come back, and has a very interesting perspective on what she is doing currently with education, and then also what she'd like to accomplish in the future too.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chris. So my background is a little bit different. I have no formal training in education whatsoever, besides being a product of the public school system and higher education, of course. My experience all comes from entrepreneurship and owning businesses. And so what I started to see in my professional career was this theme of people in general, including myself, with this inability to overcome obstacles that life inevitably gives us, coupled with, just a lack of creativity and being able to figure out any solutions to problems. And so it became something that concerned me for future generations, but like I said, also current generations that are in the workplace right now. And so as I had my own children, my son was preparing for kindergarten, I started to think about how could we change the education experience to incorporate more creativity? Because in my mind, creativity and imagination kind of go hand in hand, and because they're so important, because that's what gives us the ability to problem solve. And if we can't problem solve, we're handicapped. So I started thinking about what that environment would look like if we did create some sort of special environment that kind of bred those types of characteristics. I also wanted to include a depth of character, because I feel like that's something that's missing in our education system in general as well. And so those things kind of culminated in meeting some other folks in my community who were also very concerned about the quality of education that our children are receiving. And so in 2019, I co-founded a private Christian school in my community. And so that...
Oh, you can't, a Christian school, you can't say that anymore in our country. No, that's bad.
You're right, it is. It's so bad. But it actually was really good. And very well received by our community. So anyway, take that. We did it, and it's been very successful and a lot of fun.
And what community is this in again?
Spencer, West Virginia, which is in Roane County.
Awesome.
My favorite community.
So Kathy, why don't you explain to us what you saw being inside of the Board of Education from a state level, and the things that you were able to accomplish, as well as the things that really frustrated you that really need to be addressed for the future?
Well, bottom line, the education process is an adult process. And when you have a system that focuses on adults, you lose the main customer service piece, which is your students.
Wait a minute. Hang on. I think that phrase right there really needs to be highlighted, because if we think about it from the perspective of a taxpayer, we want a better quality product. We are paying money to the government in the form of taxes, and in return, they are supposed to be giving us a service. And this has been one of my frustrating things, and one of the primary reasons why I'm focused on getting involved in this entire process is that very thing. It is, I believe that we should look at a government as providing tangible products to the taxpayers and looking at them like their customers. I mean, that is the only way to constantly evaluate and improve it from a perspective standpoint. To hear you say that, I mean, I'd literally think the Battle Hymn of the Republic should be playing behind you while you're doing that right now.
Well, but it's true. I mean, we have to, those are our customers. They're the ones who get or do not get the product that they need to be successful. And we tend to, and in all fairness to education, because everybody bashes the system, and in some instances they should be bashed. In other instances, it's very good.
Oh, I agree.
But bottom line, they are organized because it allows them to organize and to keep their organization moving forward. Well, in that process, when you try to control everything, you lose the service end of it, which is what has happened in education. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's like, oh, wow, we're just not going to pay attention to these students anymore. They think that we're doing them a favor by telling them what it is they need to do. And if you think about it, we tell students where to go, what to eat, what to wear, where to dress, what time to come, what years, what span, what hours.
In the beginning, we have an entire system that was built around education from an agrarian perspective too. We had an economy that was being built where the importance of having kids working with the family as well was very, very big. And so we have a system where it starts early in the morning, it ends in the afternoon, and it also, there's big long summer breaks. And I just don't think that the system itself is nimble enough to adapt to what is needed currently by families and by students in how they're going to learn, especially leveraging technology moving forward.
Exactly. And so the other piece, the huge piece that is missing in education is the student's voice. They have no opportunity to be able to speak what they want, need, and can use. So somehow we've lost, well, I don't think we ever had it. And that piece is, I think, what makes the reason why education is struggling today.
That's profound. What are some of the things that you actually were able to accomplish being inside of the Department of Education in the state?
Well, I think the biggest accomplishment we had, and it was by accident, and it wasn't, I really would like to think it was a brainchild of mine, but basically was Simulated Workplace is what gave me all the understanding that I have now what needs to happen in education. And what we were doing, we had met with business people. I can't tell you how many dinners I had with business people. And over, it started with, well, here's what we need for our students so that when they come out, they can be a good worker or good employee. And that conversation went from nice conversation to the last maybe 10 years of my tenure. They were screaming at me and saying, you know what, don't try the technical people, don't even that, just send me somebody that can show up on work, give us a full day's work, be drug-free, and we'll be happy. Don't even worry about training them. And I'm going, you know, what's going on here? Our kids are wonderful. They're terrific young people. So what is missing here? So I thought, well, what if we flipped the classroom and instead of being a classroom, we turned it into a business that the students ran, that they became the CEOs, the presidents, the safety inspectors, the public relations people, and see what happens. Well, I thought it might make a little bit of difference. What happened was sort of phenomenal. And these young people, all of a sudden, because they were running their classroom, they were doing what needed to happen, they changed overnight. We went from 60% attendance rate to 98% attendance rate. We went from students drug-free. We had a 98% drug-free because we drug tested all of these students because they were now part of a business. We weren't testing them to just see if we could catch them. We were testing them to show what it's like in the world and what you have to have. All of us, our grade averages went up. It's just amazing what happened. And I thought, this needs to go everywhere, not just over here in these classes.
And do you care to go into a little more detail of what that looked like on a day-to-day basis? Like I heard it was run like a business, the students did better. What did that look like?
Walked through the door, that was their company. They started their morning with a business meeting or a meeting of their folks, and they laid out the goals for their week, for their company. When they needed to learn a skill set from their teacher, they would have professional development. So they would go in, they would be taught, just like you have in plain business, same thing. Then they would go out into their projects and they would start the project. The teacher then becomes a facilitator, not a person that just directs all the thing. What happened was, and we also started taking these same students to professional development for teachers. So they sat in and listened to what was happening. What happened there was wild too, because all of a sudden, and the teacher would say, well, we're going to do this, and the student would say, well, why can't we do this? It pushed the teacher too, but without knowing it, what happens when your teacher is the sole deliverer of education, it puts a thumb on the student's learning ability because they're only going to do what the teacher decides to do. When you open it up and they become a facilitator, then they can fly. Students can fly, or students want to go in this direction, they go in that direction. I mean, it just changes the whole dynamics.
Let me get this straight. So you guys literally empowered students to be a part of the learning process.
Of the process.
So not only did they have a say in what they were able to accomplish, but then they had a say in what was happening with the teachers and what they were being instructed. And so you flipped everything on its head and empowered the students. And then all of a sudden, attendance went up, drug use went down, and test scores went up.
Right. Do you know in West Virginia, we talk about test scores all the time, and that's one of the hammers against education. We just don't seem to be able to come. In the NUCTI, which is a national test for career tech, we are above the national average, but you never hear that. And that's the sad part. Our students are scoring, but you gotta look at what the assessments are that they're scoring on.
Fascinating. How many classes was the simulated workplace
we had
in?
2,400 companies.
2,400 companies.
Every county had at least one, had simulated workplaces. So they had anywhere from 6 to 25.
And so would students from middle school and or high school go to this?
Yes, they could go to this, but it started in the high school. We're slow. I'm changing subjects here. I got 3 empowerment districts right now we're working with where the simulated workplace environment is moving down to middle school. We're seeing phenomenal things happen there too.
Fantastic.
But that's just started. That's not, we don't have any history. We've got 9 years of simulated workplace, and the outcomes and the data we have on that, it's in your face. It's what we should be doing.
What do you think the roadblocks are to ramping that up even further at the state level?
Traditional. It's not the way we do it. It's different. And anytime change is hard. It's very hard. And in education, it's very difficult to fail because we don't look at it as an opportunity to relearn. We look at it as, what's wrong with you? That is not failure is part of life. You got to understand to learn from it. That's another piece of education. And so I think those are the pieces, and it gets people out of their comfort zone. Because if I am a person, if I mastered this particular area and all of a sudden you're asking me to change it, then I'm out of my zone. I don't control anymore. So those are just everyday things that happen. That's just life in general, and that's what makes change hard.
Andrew, why don't you enlighten us on what you've seen on the ground level doing what you're doing? And one, I'd love to hear some of the roadblocks that you experienced actually getting to the point where you're able to open the school.
Yep.
And then the second one is I'd love to hear what you're seeing on the ground out of the kids and out of the students, and then the things you had the ability to adapt and fix.
Yeah, so my experience really echoes everything that Kathy said in terms of the students' participation, their excitement, attendance, and all of those things. I mean, what we know to be true, and there's so much data that support this, that anytime that we can get children involved in their learning experience, retention is just so much higher. And then also just their enthusiasm around it. And we're developing a love for learning, which honestly, we want to do that. We want to develop skills in students that make them a lifelong student. And so one of the points I want to touch on, I was taking some notes just because I was getting excited about hearing your experience, Kathy, was just this idea of conformity versus curiosity. And to me, curiosity is extremely important. I think those drive imagination and creativity, and that's for me is what it's all about. And so I think that the U.S. Compulsory school system as a unit might put a lot of value on imitation and memorization versus an alternative, definition of success is mastering ourselves through failure, trying again. I mean, facing obstacles, overcoming those obstacles, and just challenging these assumptions of what's worth learning. And oftentimes, maybe I felt this way too in the school system. Teach me something like this. Like, I would have loved to attended simulated workplace. That for me, that would have been a game changer in my education experience. But, as a student, teach me something useful, teach me something practical that when I get out of here, or even right now, I can put in place. And something like simulated workplace is exactly what that is. And in response, our school system as an apparatus is like, instead, here's a recorder. Let's play hot cross buns. This is a critical skill that you need to know.
I still take my recorder with me to business meetings now.
So important.
Yeah, and it helps me regulate everybody around me. It was just a skill that I really loved carrying with me for the rest of my life that I learned in the 3rd grade.
I have a full concert coming up.
Oh, nice. Okay, awesome. Yeah.
Well, I have mine in the car, and I brought it just in case. But,
awesome.
It's just it's that disillusionment also. I don't want to get into the weeds too much with this, but, are we listening? Are we listening to what, and are we implementing some of those things as to what is truly useful? And, I think oftentimes I ask myself the question is, we're educating, but are we preparing? And how are we preparing our younger generation for success? And to me, that sounds like you're right on with that. So yeah, maybe moving away from not maybe moving away from hot cross buns, but maybe adding some things such as this would be really helpful, because what I see is that students respond to their potential when we call it out of them, when we hold them to a higher standard. And that's been the experience for me that I have seen, is that certainly they will go with status quo as long as we allow that. But whenever we start to call on their potential and we treat them as individuals with very specific skills, and we speak that to them and we expect it of them, they will always rise to the occasion.
So, Andrea, one of the criticisms that I saw directed at West Virginia education was that it was a little too much one size fits all.
Absolutely.
You say you left the state and came back. Is that a West Virginia specific thing, or is that an everywhere thing?
I don't think so. And again, I don't have the formal education in education necessarily, but this is just anecdotal experience that I have seen and heard. I do not believe it's specific to education, or I'm sorry, to West Virginia education. I think that that's just like a general idea of education, one size fits all. And you're talking about assessments, and we're all assessed in the same way. And that's certainly not indicative of success in the workplace or us as our ability as employees, employers, as people in general. So much more goes into that equation than one assessment and that one grade. I think that is dangerous because we define ourselves by those results of an assessment. And I think all four of us would probably score very, very differently on the same assessment. But it's clear that we all have different abilities that are just as valuable.
Yeah, and one of us may have a strong suit in something like, let's say, math or science. Then you go to the arts and somebody goes higher. It's
exactly.
just, it changes it up.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because going back to the recorder thing as well, if you think about from a learning style, why that actually is good for kids, it's kinesthetic because you're there doing, it's auditory because you're there hearing it, and also visual because you're watching somebody else. So yeah, that actually is a very good thing when it comes to developing a holistic student. That piece is important, but there's so much more on top of that we should be doing. I think that was why we were kind of at least joking around.
Yeah,
with
I'm
keeping
being
the
funny
recorders in the
about
car
it.
with us. Yeah.
Yes, but and of course those are important pieces to that as well. But just as a general rule, and back to the one size fits all. I mean, there's just so much potential.
So how did you open your school? How did that start?
With a lot of help, a lot of support, certainly. But it stemmed from this desire for a depth of character. I wanted to see that. I also wanted to see more hands-on, experiential style of learning, and that ability to be more individualistic as we're educating children, and making sure that we give them that individualized attention and space to be and create, and just see what we could do with that. We also involve the community as much as possible, which was, I think that was probably one of the biggest differentiators of our school, because our students learned from local experts. And so, we had people like chefs and woodworking and, life skills types of folks that came in and taught our children all kinds of things. And so my goal was to develop a more well-roundedness in our students. And what we see today, academics is there, that's great, but do we have the ability to apply those academics? And I think that is a huge differentiator. I mean, we face challenges in life all the time. I mean, do we have the ability to apply some of those skills beyond just academia? I mean, we see that with everything. Do we have the ability to overcome failure? Do we have the ability to be relational, to, public speaking, things like that? Those are just as important skills.
Absolutely. Did you have any issues with permitting processes or anything like that?
We really didn't. Of course, our school was on the small scale of being in a small community. So as we grow and continue to do so, I mean, the school hired a principal this year. So my day-to-day is not there quite as much, but we did not encounter too big of obstacles. I'm sure as we grow, that will happen. But no, it was a pretty smooth sailing, which I know is not the norm.
Not normal. How many kids are now in the school?
So we have just under 50. We started at 35. The Hope Scholarship had something to do with that. But of course, it's been a tremendous benefit for our community.
And what are the age spreads of the kids in the school?
So we started out K through 8. This year we added high school.
Wow, and you've got a total of 50 kids now.
Yeah, it's
fantastic.
Been a great thing.
What are the feedback from the parents that you're getting on your guys' approach?
Gratitude. They're excited. They're excited about an alternative way, an approach to education. They were very excited. Just, it's nothing necessarily against the public school system at all. And that's, I think, is where we got some pushback in the beginning, but it's just an alternative. It's nothing negative.
One of the standard talking points from the public education system that is the reason why they oppose private education in general is that just all the good students are just going to go there and leave, and we're going to be stuck with all the bad ones. What's your thought on that?
I think that's purely. That's not fair. That's not fair because every child has some sort of potential. And I think it's the job and responsibility of the instructor and the educators to pull that out of them. There is value in every child. So I reject that statement.
I think one of the challenges listening to public educators in our state is, what the impact the opiate epidemic has had in the behavior of some of the kids that are coming into the school.
Really?
One, because they don't have a solid family unit with both parents intact that are there creating a system at home for the kids to operate under. And then also, two, is some of the emotional things that come along with being born addicted to opiates. And then also, I kind of wonder, this is my personal perspective, how much of the cell phone use and addiction to technology is impacting, one, how these kids are paying attention and learning when they get into school, and then two, for the overall development of them in the future.
Yeah, so a lot there. First of all, I think that the teachers and instructors are handicapped by this opioid crisis because when we're not meeting the basic needs of a child, when they show up in a classroom, they are not there to learn. They are thinking about how hungry they are, where are they going to live, where are they going to sleep tonight. They're probably tired from not getting enough sleep the night previous. Maybe, they haven't showered or just, general hygiene. And education is not the first thing on their mind when those basic needs are not being met. So how does a teacher, how can a teacher, I think it's an unfair task. We have to be able to meet those needs for those children. And to the second point, Chris, around the addiction to technology. I mean, again, I think that we are doing a disservice to our children by not allowing them to develop those thinking skills, critical thinking skills. By they have a lot of access to these types of devices, and is that helping them in ways? Yes. In other ways, maybe not.
But you know what? It goes beyond just the addiction to the tech. It's really also about interpersonal communication.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, we're not, our kids are not learning these skills of, embarrassing moments or the nervousness of going up and asking someone to dance. Or
Exactly.
We were just talking about the homecoming dance that happened here in town. The kids were all back home early. They went long enough to get a selfie and then come home. They're not going to hang out. Why go over and talk to someone and dance when you can go back and get on your device?
Yeah, and just text them.
Yeah, sure.
But my question, did anybody talk to the students on what type of homecoming dance they'd like to have?
That's a great point.
No, my son is on student council, and we literally had a family dinner last night where we talked about that. I listened to what he thought about homecoming, his experience that he had, and then I said, well, what do you think? And he goes, I just don't think the dances are designed to get us engaged anymore.
Thank you.
And I said, well, how are you going to fix that? And he goes, I don't know. I said, well, you're on student council. Don't you think you should have a voice in that? And he goes, I do. So at least, maybe they wind up, championing it and figuring it out, but you're exactly right.
Yeah, I watching these young people over the last 6 years as these companies matured, I would walk into a school and somebody come up, they told us we couldn't do this at the homecoming this year. They didn't even ask us, Dr. D'Antoni, what it was we wanted. See, they were used to running their companies, but all of a sudden, in the big environment, they weren't even asked. They were told. And once you start doing that, and don't get me wrong, you have to have, I hate rules, you have to have an environment that supports purpose and equality and all of that stuff. But it has to be a discourse with the students, with the customer, to understand. And you're going to find what I found with these young people when they met they wrote their own rules and responsibilities for their companies. They were much tougher than adults. But it was their rules. And so then they conformed, I hate that word too, but they went along with that because it was the group that did it. But I mean, we had one young man that spent more time in detention than he's ever had. When he went into a company, he became the safety inspector of his company. Never saw a child in detention again. So you've got to look at, what is it with these children? And technology, folks, that's our world, and that's their world. They are the techno-gods. They're coming up. They know. So we've got to figure out, if we're going to have an educational system of any kind, how that technology fits with them. You can't ignore it. You can't say it's not. It's there. And I think Brad Smith spoke to the memory or the attention span now of a third grader is something like 9 seconds. So you can't sit them and talk to. You got to figure out, how do we take the technology that is their world, and how do we incorporate it into where they use that technology to further what it is that they want to use. We can't blame it, ignore it, require it to go away. It's here. It's there. So we've got to figure that out quickly, because it's going to just get worse. I mean, not worse. It's just going to get stronger in their lives.
I think the adage of power and responsibility could go into play here, because with that technology, we have a lot of power. And with that power, we should also be teaching responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Real quick, I just want to bridge two things that were said. You talked about the child that was in detention. You brought up, Andrea, children that are coming to school that are worried about other things other than education, because maybe they're disadvantaged financially, their family, et cetera. One of the things that I saw too is that these families, these children that are coming to school, this a lot of times too will translate into behavioral issues. And so therefore, then something like suspension becomes a hindrance to days in the classroom and a blockade to instruction time. So what kind of impact does that have?
Yeah, I would think that especially our teachers, they're dealing with maybe a larger percentage than normal of behavioral issues. I mean, that probably takes up a lot of their time during the day, is just managing behavior of their students. And of course, that takes away not only from what they want to accomplish in the day, but the other students that are in the classroom as well. And so, I'm sure that that presents an unimaginable consequence and task for our teachers, is just handling that.
We've got to figure out, you cannot place the burden of opioids and the outcomes of opioids on school systems. You can't put poverty on school systems. These are teachers who have gone through a formal how do you teach that aren't equipped to deal with the problems that we're seeing today that has been caused by opioids. So as a state and as a community, we've got to come together and figure out, it's almost like the community in schools type of situation. We've got to figure out a process by which we can help these young people at the same time helping our teachers, because something's got to give here. You can't do what education process if, like Andrea says, if a child's hungry, if a child hasn't slept. So what is a process that we are going to develop that looks at, here's what happens if this child is in need of something else before he can learn. Then this is what happens to this child's his education process. So I don't have the answer for that. I wish I did. I'd be $1 million.
Well, it also feeds back into the one-size-fits-all talk, right?
Exactly. But I do know this. I do know that if a child is engaged and excited about his experience, then half or 3/4 of the battle has been won.
Question for you both. Do you think that we are empowering teachers enough on the ground level to have the ability to discipline better or more thoroughly? How is that looking, and what kind of training are we giving our teachers, and where is that going?
Are we empowering teachers? No. It's real simple. Not at all. Because the work that I'm doing in these model counties or prototypes, the hardest part is getting the teacher out of the thought that you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do. They are so regimented in school systems that they've forgotten or are not comfortable with stepping out and doing something. I said, you know, guys, you're there, you know. Yeah, but what happens if our test scores go down? Then we're chastised.
They're afraid they're going to be held accountable for the
Yeah,
test scores, so why take a risk?
There you go. So you know,
it's like they're incentivized and also pushed and encouraged to do nothing but teach towards a test.
basically, that's where we are, because that, if you look at all the newspaper articles, test scores in West Virginia, blah, 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 blah.
And I've never met a standardized test that helped me become better at being a person.
No joke. Well, let me tell you something about the standardized test, too. If the nobody's ever talked about the vocabulary in a test. And the NAEP, which is one of the biggest, that's why we're ranked where we're ranked, is the NAEP. And it only sampling tests maybe 100 students in West Virginia. That's it. And we're ranked because of those 100. And those students have to be in certain cell sets. It's
Wait a minute.
awful.
What does NAEP stand for?
It's a national, it's done by the federal government. It's a national assessment in APE. I'm not sure what it is.
And
it
literally,
stands for.
our ranking from an educational standpoint, let me get this straight, depends on the standardized testing of only about 100 students.
Yes.
And how are they random? Are they randomly selected? How are they
They're
selected?
random, but they have to be in certain cell sets. So basically what happens in West Virginia, and I hope I'm not misspeaking here, but I think I'm correct, it's almost the same kids being tested every year because we have to have them in certain cells. So you have to have so many white children, so many African American children, so many children in poverty.
Does that match up with the state demographics, or are we looking at a further skew because the state has X amount of demographics, but then we're required?
It's national cell sets. So that's why we get killed. But I went to the other piece of it's the vocabulary of that test. And example, one of the questions on the NAEP was find the slope of a line. Well, if you go with career tech kids, my kids, which are about 1/3 of the whole population, if they're taking that test, they're going to glaze over. However, if you would say, find the pitch of the line, every one of them could answer it. So my question to the guy was, has anybody looked at the vocabulary? I mean, do you talk about skyscrapers on this test? Who sees skyscrapers in West Virginia? I mean,
We'd understand the word holler.
Here we go. Put a holler
Yeah.
with a kid in Chicago and ask him how far it is up a holler.
Right. They have no clue.
There you go.
And I bet if you
There
asked,
you go.
what's the degree decline from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the holler, and we could answer that.
There you
Yeah,
go.
the accent in there too.
There you go.
I'm
That's
born and
something.
raised here, Andy. Don't worry.
But that's my whole point. And it drives me crazy when they start to do this, because our young people, I mean, what has happened with our young people and some of the things that they have accomplished, you never see on the front page of the paper, ever. And that's what drives me nuts. Just drives me crazy.
And Kathy, what type of decisions does that data inform, and how? I mean, that was my thought, as you're saying this, because if it's that type of data that we're looking for, what type of decisions are informed by that data, and how does that change the curriculum?
Nothing. Because all it does is gives the legislature an opportunity to pound the gravel. Education is bad. Education is awful. You don't know what you're doing.
So in order to avoid criticism, we don't dissect what's going right and what's going wrong and how we can improve the particular program from an educational standpoint at the Department of Education in front of us.
But
Exactly.
The politics or the public, it's almost like you want to blame somebody or something. And so instead of looking at the whole and looking at all the accomplishments, and there are deficiencies, we could change a lot of things, but for heaven's sakes, give them credit for what they are doing correctly. And so it's looking at multiple assessments, multiple ways of looking at our system to see what we need to change. Where are our deficiencies? I mean, when you have These companies I was talking about, they built 15 tiny homes under Governor Tomlin, handed turnkey these homes to flood victims in Greenbrier Valley. Where was all that publicity? These are young people who absolutely designed, made, gave up their Thanksgiving weekends to go do this. Here's my question. They have all these tiny homes. I made the suggestion at that time, why don't they take these tiny homes and have our career tech, our companies build them, store them. When you have tragedies happen like floods, bring them out, set them up for these communities so these people have places to live. When they're through, clean them, bring them back. We could have sent them to Kentucky for their flood area. We aren't using the resource. These young people are a tremendous economic resource. Use them.
Agreed. What do you guys think about the role in standardized testing moving forward? And what either one is the importance or lack thereof of importance? And two, what do we do?
I'm still trying to understand what the purpose and importance of standardized tests. I understand that we are able to see how our students test, which should be indicative of what they're learning and how well our instructors are instructing it. But if we're not using that data, and if it's only from specific cell sets that don't necessarily represent in a correct way our demographics, how is that useful data?
Well, first of all, the NAEP is different from a standardized testing. So the NAEP is a national federal government from the Federal Department of Education test. Standardized testing is a state test, and they do look at data. They do take the data and look at the data. The problem is it's a test that's given in a 3-hour, 1 hour in a block at the end of the year or at the end of third, eighth, I forget the years it's done, but it's looked at. There needs to be, you all said it before, everybody's different. Everybody has different talents. There needs to be a multiple measurement. And it needs to be, in my opinion, performance-based testing. I may not be able to get 2 + 2 = 4. I'm being very simple here. But I might be able to show you how to put a building together where I use 2 and 2 and get 4. You've got to be able to give the child an opportunity to defend their education. We go back to them defending them. If you make them accountable and they have to defend their mastery, you open up a whole new world for these kids.
It's funny you say that because I think about my daughter, for example, and we've been having a hard time with her, getting up to speed with the math curriculum. And what we figured out is that if we're sitting down in front of her and going over division on a piece of paper, it doesn't make sense to her the same way as that we go out to our farm and show her a bunch of hay bales and then ask her to divide them up and effectively do division. That way she gets it instantaneously, she understands completely, and she absorbs it and learns it very, very quickly. And it's because it's more kinesthetic than it is visual. And I sit down and look at our ability to do that and where we are from a socioeconomic standpoint and realize that there's so many other families and kids that may not be having that same assessment and evaluation of where their strengths and weaknesses are so we can help them learn to the best of their ability.
Well, think of it from the customer side, the student side. We're doing standardized testing this week. Okay, fine. Check, 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 check. I finished. I mean, you're talking about kids. I'm through because it has nothing to do with them. It doesn't mean that they graduate. It doesn't mean that they get a score on the grade card. It doesn't mean nothing. So why do I perform my best? Why? Now, there are some kids that just are competitive enough that they want to perform their best. But then you've got the student that just came in who's late getting into school. Check this off. There you go. There's my test. I'm through. If the same children come in and say, okay, today you've got your portfolio, you tell me how this fraction works. You show me that you understand it. Now I'm accountable. There's just, and I'm being very simplistic here.
I understand.
But the point is, any type of testing or any type of, and I'd rather look at the fact that a child is progressing the way he should be, the child has to be accountable too. You can't just put that on the school and the teacher. So the child has to have skin in the game. So where is it?
Is it safe to say, based on what you just said, it sounds to me like the report card that you would get would be a way better indicator of how the child is progressing than anything standardized.
Where we are with how we test, yes. Now, is there other ways of measuring? Yes. You can do portfolios. The child can perform. That you can do performance like we do in career tech, where the student has to put a motor together. You can sit there and look that he knows what he's doing. So there are lots of ways that we can make sure that our students are getting the education they need. But I like what Andrea said earlier. It's not, folks, about 2 + 2 + 2. It's about, because with the invention of the cell phone, I can find you any answer on a test in 2 seconds. And you better believe these little techno gods know how to do that.
And they can do it in 0.5.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, but can they do critical thinking? Can they problem solve? Can they communicate? These soft skills that are now so important to success, that's where education needs to go. I can find answers, but I got to know, once I have that answer, what does that mean? How does it apply? There are different skill sets in our world today. I needed to know in 1942 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Today, that is not necessary, because I can look it up on the cell phone and find out in 1942. Now, why he did that and what happened because he did that, that's a different ballgame. So.
And in our school, of course, we did have to do those assessments to appease the gods of education. But the other focus that we had that I liked a lot more is focusing on personal growth. So if your student was, here last year, let's look at the progress that they've made. And I think for our parents, that was really important, because we graded them on so many levels. For example, were they team players? Did they exhibit leadership skills? Did they, comfortably speak in front of their classmates? Or did they participate in conversations? And so if a parent were to see any progress, that would be exciting to them. And I think to the child as well, I also think that develops confidence in them, that they were able to see that they were able to grow in a weakness area of theirs. And to me, that's an important marker of success.
So a topic of discussion I think would be really interesting is talking about the assessment standards that teachers are held accountable to, and also the training that they are getting and what they are responsible for in the state of West Virginia to conveying to our kids. Talk to us, Kathy, a little bit about the assessment side of things from the public school system and what teachers are responsible for.
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question. They are, schools are ranked by their test scores. Teachers fear not having the test scores high enough, because then that makes their school look bad, which comes back and reflects on them. So, yeah, it's on everybody's mind in your school system, because that's how you are seen across the state. My county is top, so therefore I can walk down the streets and hold my head. My county's at the bottom. Shame on you, teachers. So,
does county being top represent, more revenue coming into it?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not.
So there's no benefit financially?
No, but it is. It affects board elections. It affects superintendents. It affects parents want their students not in those schools.
And it has to be a driver of population growth and a reason to pull people into our state. And if they're looking at multiple options, test scores would certainly be relevance.
That is a very, very fantastic point, is the importance of economic development and having a good education system. If I could reword the question slightly, how are the teachers graded themselves? How are they evaluated? And then what are they responsible for training-wise, and what kind of training are they being given on a yearly basis?
Well, there's a lot of professional development that's done by the State Department in the schools. Not so much testing professional, it's more project-based learning, some different types of teaching, ways to teach that I'm sure it's like the Math for Life campaign trying to up our math scores. I mean, I look at it as this revolving door because every year there's a new thing that's out there.
Of all this new stuff that we're doing, all the training that we're giving the teachers, yet we're still not seeing a direct impact in the tangible products to the taxpayers.
Because you are not talking to your customer. I go back to that 1,000 times. You can teach something this way, and then you teach it this way. When the student is not accountable and doesn't have a voice, and you're trying to get them engaged because you're just talking, you're not ever going to make progress.
One of the driving forces behind me returning to West Virginia when I did a couple years ago is because of the values that West Virginia represents. I wanted to raise my children in the same environment that I was raised, and I am a believer in those values. How are we holding the line? Because that's important. As we bring people to West Virginia, oftentimes they're like-minded. They share those same values that we do. So it's incredibly important to me, and where I want to get involved is to protect those values so that we continue to attract the same and like-minded families here in West Virginia. So what are we doing about that? How are we holding the line?
My kid is going to a public high school, my oldest son. And during he's a sophomore now, in his freshman year, he had a teacher during the first day of school ask him, the entire class, what they called out the name for roll call, what their pronouns were. What does that have to do with learning at all? And so this leads to my follow-up question of where is this happening and what kind of training is being provided to our teachers to actually encourage and implement this stuff? I don't understand what's going on where this has become a part of education.
I didn't see that during the time that I was there. So I don't know, this is evolving over the past couple of years. I do know part of this problem is media, social media. I just go back to the point that the student has to have a voice in it. I have found over many, many years that once you involve that student into a respected voice, things happen for the best because students really have more common sense sometimes than adults. So, but I haven't run into that, Chris, so I can't really answer that one.
And Chris, another thing too, though, that like you mentioned, there not being much data around that this is happening. But what about there's no flags. The American flag does not exist like as a rule in our school system. There are no consequences for this kind of thing. Like I know a friend of mine, her kindergartner brought home a homework worksheet with blank flags, and the task was to color in the appropriate flags. The LGBT flag was on that, included in that sheet, and why.
This is the public school.
This is a public school.
I find it mind-boggling that we don't have American flags in the classrooms, yet we've got kids.
They're in every school I've ever been in.
Is that right? As a rule, it's not the Pledge of Allegiance. Are we saying that across the board?
Yeah.
My children are. And we do have an American flag. I think as the point that you're making that it's not enforced, that they have to.
Or that it's up to there could be an LGBT flag present. There does not have to be the American flag. In fact, in a lot of public school systems, we're seeing that the American flag is gone. The rainbow flag is there. And I think that in West Virginia it is in its infancy, but that's important because it's happening. And where do we start exercising control if we have no awareness?
Yeah, I think this goes back to a very important piece to the education conversation, which is one, empowering students to make them feel like they have a voice in their education, and two, communicating with parents who are the taxpayers and effectively are a half of that customer relationship, because the parents are still the customers at the end of the day because they're the ones paying the taxes, to communicate to them about this stuff. I need to verify this, but in my son's school, I do not believe they are saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day. I need to verify that. I do not know if there are American flags up in the classroom or not. I need to verify that. I don't know, but I will find out. I'm very curious now. In your school that you have, is that something that's a part of every single day?
Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
That's important. We start every day with, well, of course, prayer is important too. So we do the pledge to the Christian flag, but we absolutely do the United States Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is present. I mean, that's a big part of our culture.
Kathy, when you were involved in the state Board of Education, what did you see from that level? Did you see, the Pledge of Allegiance being said every single day?
Yes.
Good.
In fact, I was just in a school the other day. We were doing the herd challenge with a lot of schools, with middle schools, and in the gymnasium, there's a huge flag. I forget which school we were in. I think it was Point Pleasant. But anyway, so that came to mind when she said that. But now I cannot say for sure that there's a flag in every school. I mean,
Sure.
I would just.
And are we protecting that? Where does that guideline come from? Is it up to the teacher?
No, I think that goes back to your county boards and how.
That was my next question. If Chris was going to call the school and ask what is happening, it makes me wonder, is that school rule? Is that per teacher? Is that per? I mean, I just took my daughter early to class last Wednesday because there was a ceremony outside the flag. So I know that's still at my kids' school, at public schools.
Games, I mean, we're still doing it at ball games.
Oh yeah, 100%. So I don't know.
What about higher education in our state?
That I can't speak to.
I can't either on that one.
I would need to verify that, but my intuition is
They still do it at Marshall games, right?
Yeah, they do it at Marshall games, yes, but
before
not
the
in
games, yes, but
but
not in
the
the
classroom's different.
If it's happening anywhere, it's still a problem because that's where it starts. It starts somewhere, and again, I think that's just where quality control comes in. I mean, I don't know how much of responsibility is as patriots, maybe, but that's important.
I was going to say, if the argument. Let me play the devil's advocate for a second. If we want to empower the educator, and the educator says, "Well, if I'm in charge of my class, I would like to not have that be a part of what I'm doing. I'd like for them to be focused on X, Y, or Z."
Yeah.
Then that becomes the debate, right?
Then I would talk about the responsibility of education as a tool for social engineering, and I would also talk about how it seems to be the goal to pry from the United States its grip of sovereignty, and how do we argue that that's not what's happening when we remove things like the flag and the symbolism of our culture? How are we protecting our culture if we're removing the flag? I mean, those are tenets of our country. I'm sorry, I'm going to get a little crazy about those.
But if we're going to empower the educators, you're an educator, and so then there's your voice, right? And you're the voice for. And then I think you should expect that there will be voices against, right?
Right.
And so then that becomes an important conversation.
Yeah, but who's deciding? Who's deciding like what we can and can't do? If the LGBT flag is just as important to me, and I want to have that represented in my classroom, then who's to say?
I would say that there's a clear and utter difference between a United States flag and the flag of a particular, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Social group.
Social group. I don't think that there are social groups that need to be involved in the education system in any way, shape, or form.
I would agree with you, but who the folks that are making this call? I don't know if they feel the same way.
And as a parent, I would want to make sure and know that this is something that is being considered, and is that something that we want as a culture?
Absolutely.
And I think that goes back to the communication from the education system to the parents, and looking at them from, like what Kathy said in the very beginning, as the customer.
Absolutely. And I think that instills ownership in the customer. That gives them the ability to then have accountability if they're owning the process or some piece of the process that they've come up with. So I absolutely agree that's important.
One of the wonderful things that also becomes an issue, but it is by all means the strongest, is the Constitution of the United States, which gives voice to all the things that we are finding troublesome. So how do you, as an educational system, develop the child to be able, I mean, I would hate to think, I mean, I love my country because I love what it stands for. So how do you start, how do we have the civil discourse on how our country is a melting pot that brings everybody? I mean, I go back to my grandfather that I can remember. I don't speak Italian, which is, in my point, I wish I did, because he would not allow Italian to be spoken in the home because he was an American. That's what we've lost, is our Americanism.
It sounds like the
Our pride.
solution. Yeah, it sounds like the solution is teaching the Constitution.
Individualism. That's why we're great as a country, is because we can all be individuals. But when that line steps over on your line, then where's the conversation and what holds us as a melting pot, but not somebody that overruns and becomes boiling over? I mean, that's where we are.
And Kathy, something that you said earlier, you were talking about the culture of blame. Okay, like that we look to blame. This is what's wrong, we blame. And one of the things that we had a guest on, we had Bill Cole come on, and he told a story about talking to his father when he was young, fresh out of college, and he came in and told him everything that was wrong with the business. And his father looked at him and said, anyone can point out everything that's wrong, but it's only someone with solutions that will make the change. And I think that what you just said there, as well as the point that I was even making with Andrea too, and that is we should expect there to be the opposing side, and that needs to be a conversation.
Yep.
And that goes to the very core of the Constitution and the very core of what we are. It is about debate. It is about having opposing viewpoints. So, you know, I think that if you want to be a voice for the flag, then be a voice for the flag. If you want to be a voice for LGBTQ, then be a voice. And then we have a system where we vote. Isn't that sort of the point?
Yes. I think the one thing that I would at least retort all that with is where does that belong a part of the classroom?
If some of it does, all of it does, though. If we're influencing anything about our social stance in the classroom, then where do we draw the line?
It becomes slippery slope pretty quick.
Absolutely.
I go back to personal opinions. I don't think, my mother used to tell me, you don't light the fire if there's no fire to light. I think sometimes we jump in to be so woke that we create situations that don't need to be created. And a lot of times people, I'm looking, this is observations too, it's a way to blame the reason I am the way I am. I can blame it on you and you, but it never comes back here. And that's what we've lost. In my educational experience, even as a student, I used to come home, this teacher, blah, 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 blah. I don't care how bad looking back that teacher was. My parents never allowed my excuse that I can't do this because I have a bad teacher. This is what it is. You figure out how to deal with it. So there's something there that we've lost.
And we have to get okay with being irked again. It used to be okay to be upset about something. Now, if I'm upset, I'm attacked. I am physically harmed.
Yeah, and that's
right?
not okay. But I agree that the freedoms are what make our country so great. And, that's something we should celebrate and protect. But I think the other side of that is at what point do we the silent majority? They think that they are the minority because we're silent about it. That's kind of sometimes how things snowball and legislation occurs.
That's true.
When we're not paying attention.
Very true.
And now it's become another part of our culture. It creeps in so slowly. And when a lot of us as the silent majority are yeah, it's fine, do your thing. Then all of a sudden we wake up one day and there's legislation now.
Or how about the outspoken minority? Where you have, by the way, you can get in the city of Ashland, 30 people who are really outspoken on Facebook can change things that the city commission decides.
Exactly.
Because they don't want to be attacked by the 30 people
That's right.
who are rude enough to say outlandish, non-fact-based things.
Yep.
But they go, I don't want to be under attack, so I'm going to vote down that thing that otherwise the rest of the Ashlanders wanted.
And that's when it's important to stay involved in the conversation.
The outspoken minority needs to be mentioned, right?
Because culture changes shift. And when culture changes shift, legislation reflects that. And then all of a sudden we have a completely different country.
In fact, a lot of times when people ask, when there is some kind of a movement and you say, why does that matter? The answer is because sometimes it dictates legislation.
Absolutely.
And legislation is something we have to live by. Now we're talking infringement.
And it starts with social.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, social media is a tool that is it's
but
weaponized.
Social issues are what dictates change in our legislation. They're the loudest. They demand it.
Right, and we've allowed anonymity. I can speak against you, but you don't know who I am.
Oh, yes.
That drives me crazy.
Oh, so as somebody who's very community involved, I've been under attack more than once, and never with someone that I knew who it was.
Yeah.
Well, there's no accountability, and that's, you can say whatever you want to say.
One of the things that I always try to stick to as well in understanding that we all play a role in education, but my real role is to be a father and a husband and to take the unit that my wife and I are championed to manage and help grow that unit to make better human beings than what my wife and I are. And, being a constitutionalist and really understanding the value of the freedom of speech, which is fascinating how this all gets enveloped into the education conversation, because we're having a conversation about this wokeism thing and how that works. And my real problem with all of this is I think the freedom of speech is so important to protect that we're moving into a mindset at a point in time that has created a mindset where words are violence, words hurt. And we are censoring one portion of people while magnifying the freedom of another group of people. And therein lies the dissolvement of the fabric of goes to patriotism, the family values, what we know works over the long term.
Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And logic in particular, because I look back at this whole woke thing and, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a dinosaur. And thank God my parents didn't put me on DNA modifiers and turn my kneecaps on backwards and sew a tail onto my body and tell everybody at school that, their son is a dinosaur now. They treat him there as such. And, the other thing that I try to talk to my kids about is never to let somebody else's words affect how they feel.
Amen.
Because at the end of the day, that is the only thing that I can control is how I feel. And, I walk out in the street and get hit by a car. I can't do anything about that. Now, my wits can prevent it, but I cannot stop what that other person is doing. As well, when somebody says something to me, I can listen to what they say, but I should never let their words affect how I feel because that's the only thing that I can control. Mm-hmm. And we live in a time where we're told that the only way you can think that way is from a position of power and that you're wrong for thinking that way to begin with. Yep. There's something about this whole thing that breaks away from logic. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm really struggling.
Well, here's my hot take on this a little bit, or at least here's part of it to me, is that we now, starting, let's say, with MySpace and YouTube, so we're going to call this 2002, 2003, okay? Since about then, so gosh, we're going on 20 years of this, right? So it has become something, the way that you present yourself, I say you meaning everyone, that you present yourself on Facebook or on Instagram or TikTok, however platform you're positioning yourself, it becomes your identity to the public. A lot of they don't see everything. They see what you allow them to present, right? So when you present this as your ID, as who you are as an individual, when someone says something that you disagree with and they say it publicly on social media, it's taken personally as an attack on who you are as a person. Whereas before social media, you didn't really have that. Someone could say something that hurt you at dinner and you'd go, what an idiot. And go home and tell your wife or your friend, he's an idiot, she's an idiot. That was it. Now it's, how dare they? They have ruined my day. My blood pressure is up. I had to go to the doctor because of what they said. That's where we're at. And I think that some of the identity of how you portray yourself on social media is some of the problem.
Don't you think that's kind of been woven into our culture as of recently? I mean, this idea of like toxic masculinity, that definitely plays into it. You know, like you said, Chris, like your role as a father and a husband, that's really important, but not according to the world's standards. So I think that's getting really watered down, and we're becoming oversensitive to so many of those things. But the other side of this is personal responsibility. I mean, that has totally gone to the wayside. It's our personal responsibility, the way that we feel. It's our personal responsibility, the way that we react to a comment like that. And flying off the handle and overreacting, you know, that's a victim mentality. Like, now I've become the victim of what you've said, and now my life is, you know, it's your fault that I've done what I've done.
And I can get a crowd behind you.
I can cost you your career.
You absolutely
I can cost you your career.
Me. Yeah.
I can end what you are right now.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
I'm going to change your Facebook page. Yeah.
Please don't.
And what's funny, to tie this whole thing back full circle, it goes back to the one way that we can fix this is by empowering students and empowering parents who are the taxpayers to have a different perspective in what's happening with education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because one thing, and I was talking to Andrea earlier, the one thing I've seen in my span of educating, we are so fortunate in West Virginia. Our base of young people are phenomenal. We have humble, smart, caring young people. You don't see large gangs. You don't, and this opiate is more the middle section, not our young people. If I can tell you, and our young people, you may have some, but these kids are testing. They want the little sheet that says I'm drug free. They don't want to be connected. But we've got to harness that and support it, because one of the reasons that they go crazy is because there's no support system for these young people. And they get out, even though they're good, the only way they've got to either earn money or do something, sell drugs or collect a check or whatever scam. I mean, or they leave the state.
But one of the things you just said, you said there was a middle section, and then the ones that are younger are not what the middle section is. That to me is a hopeful thing.
Oh, it's wonderful.
That should be a message.
It should be. And we should see that every day on the front pages of the papers of what our the good stuff, like, for example, these young people across the state have fixed and done 369 projects for the state parks. They've gone in, they've rewired them, they built swings. Where is all that in the news?
Do you believe there's any chance that is indicative that we're moving out of this epidemic?
Oh, I'm never sure we had an epidemic other than they said we did.
I think what he's referring to is the opiate epidemic.
Yes.
Oh,
that's what I'm referring to. No, that's exactly what I'm referring to.
When you lose a lot of folks, there's an epidemic, but you've got to, it can't consume you to the point that you lose the other side of it, or the other students that are there that aren't. I mean, I can tell you how many kids said, I want that sheet of paper that says I'm drug free, because they were a teenager. Everybody looked at them like, well, are you using? Are you doing? You know?
It's funny you bring that up, because thinking about my oldest son and his friends, and then looking at my middle son and even my daughter, these kids are smarter than we were.
Oh.
They have so much more access to information than we had. They're learning about deeper issues at a quicker point in time in their lives than we did. And they're being accelerated very, very quickly from a mental development standpoint. Yet at the same time, it seems that our education system hasn't caught up with what the future demands of what kids need is going to be. In particular, and you made a very good point, we literally had a break where we started talking about this stuff, and it morphed into a conversation. I only hope that what we've talked about all this past time has been filmed, because it is pure gold. But it all started with a conversation about how has our education system evolved fast enough to keep up with the new demand of what the requirements are for the students nowadays and what they're needing because of technology.
Right.
And I don't think that it has. And the other thing is that how technology plays a role in education in the future. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is TikTok, for example, which is a social media app that I'm not on. But what is being funneled to our kids and our people here in the United States from an algorithm standpoint is nothingness and nonsense. And you look at this same app in China because of regulations by the government in China. They aren't fed that same type of ridiculousness. They're fed nothing but educational things and personal development things on TikTok. And that's not a real market. That's what their government wants. And yet at the same time, we're over here in a freedom type of aspect where that's being magnified and used against us. And so my ultimate question, this may be where we end the podcast today, is what is the role that technology is going to play in the future of education, and how does that all work out?
I think it is a very important role. I mean, we've got to learn how to capture it. We have to learn how you use it. You go into, right now, metaverse, the new artificial intelligence. It's going to change everything. We're only maybe, 3-5 years away from all that stuff? That's going to change everything. So a good thing in education, real simply, we teach all this math. Where's coding? Coding should be taught in our first graders. I mean, this is where we're headed. They don't need to be coders, but they need to understand coding because that's the future. That's where we're all moving to.
In digital marketing right now, we look at it and we can see, somebody could say, well, I've got an undergrad degree in English from Marshall, or did you spend I bet you could do it in less than 6 months. If you could get Google certified, understand how to read Google Analytics and build a cost per click campaign, my ad agency can use you right now.
Yes. Well,
and I mean, that's incredible.
Salesforce is a 1-year certification that manages data systems.
I know Salesforce very well.
Okay. 150,000 starting jobs in Charlotte. You can walk in and I have a young man who listened to me and got certified who's paying for his college degree. So, yes, I mean, technology is our future. We better figure out how do we change our system, our educational system, to where we incorporate it, use it, and help our young people as they move forward.
I have a suggestion in that one, knowing where we need to be going. And if you look at the structure of our state, we are in the top 15 in the country when it comes to dollars spent per student per capita. And yet those resources don't flow into the classroom. And if you look at the structure, we have a state board of education, a big, fat, bloated bureaucracy, followed by 55 counties with 55 boards of educations, 55 layers of administrations, 55 bureaucracies, and all of that stuff soaks up resources before it gets into the classroom to benefit the students and benefit the teachers to have them be more prepared to handle the future requirements. It doesn't allow them to be lean and nimble, and it doesn't allow them to adapt curriculums to benefit the classrooms that they're experiencing. It creates nothing but a layer of control that literally magnifies all the stuff that we've seen, that we've discussed today, that are the essential problems that don't allow us to adapt to the new market of what education needs to be. And I think if we start anywhere, I think we need to start with the structure from a bird's eye view, because we also have a major teacher shorting in our country. We have a major teacher shorting here in the state of West Virginia. And if we are going to improve education, we need to be able to pay teachers more money to actually recruit more of them to come in, and then also recruit them in from a education standpoint out of high school and into college to get degrees in education, so they're flowing in to want to actually teach our kids. It's funny, it's a structural thing and a resource thing. And I look at it like this. The best paid people need to be the ones up front engaging with the customer, providing a life improvement for those kids and for those families. Doesn't need to be the people sitting behind glasses in Board of Educations and in Department of Educations. It needs to be the teachers and the counselors and everybody else that's on the ground actually making stuff happen. And the role up here should be nothing but support, and it should be lean and it should be effective. I see a structural standpoint here. What do you think, Kathy?
I tend to agree. I really do. And it needs a shift in again, education processes. We need to re-look at all the process, the bureaucracy area, the educational process, how we deliver education, changing teachers to facilitators, not to deliverers. I mean, there needs to be a full change across the board to meet where we are in our country. It was wonderful in the 40s. I mean, it was a way for everybody, for this country, to educate everybody. Well, now we're at a point we need to figure out how to do it efficiently. We got it started, but it's like we never looked at it again to figure out what was good, the bad, and how we change. We never stopped to look at it. And I think it's time. I think it's way past time.
And there's the irony in the idea that nationally teachers are recognized as grossly underpaid, yet it is always the person, running for office that says we need to take care and invest in our future and invest in our educators. And yet here we are nationally. You could ask just about it. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who thinks teachers are overpaid.
It just dawned on me that it's a structural thing. And it's like an inverted pyramid. And at the top, you have the boards of educations and the bureaucracies and the bloat. In the middle, you've got the teachers before you get to the parents and the students at the very bottom. And it's not stable. And if we look at education, it probably should be inverted like this, where the parents and the students and the customer are there creating the foundation, followed by the teachers, and the teachers then the same thing that we're talking about when it comes to listening to the students and empowering them, listening to the teachers and empowering them, and that leads to a very small top layer bureaucracy that then does nothing but facilitate supporting what happens at the education level.
And resources should flow in that direction as well.
Exactly right. It should flow to the very bottom, most importantly, where it belongs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've said for a long time, education system, instead of being run by the 3 R's, are being run by the 3 B's: bells, buses, and balls. And that's how we run our system.
That's really good.
Yeah, that
I
is
put
good.
one more of the 4 B's: bureaucrats, bells, buses, balls, and bureaucrats.
Well, that's another B.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's the 4B.
Yeah. And from the perspective of our state, too, and why this is especially timely, I mean, I think that we have to understand what we as a state do really well. What are our differentiators? What do we have to offer? Because we need to bring people to West Virginia. We need to bring people back to West Virginia. I mean, retention is a big problem that we have. And, I think that we also need to be cognizant of what we can improve upon. And I think the data obviously points to education as something that we have the ability to change. There's so much potential. And I come back to this all the time. The potential that is in our state is incredible. It just needs to be capitalized on. Everything's there. We just need to put our foot on the accelerator right now, and let's do it.
What are the 3 lowest hanging fruits that you would change right now if you could?
I think that back to what we talked about with just the ability and the potential of all the technology that we have. I think that something that is lacking, and I don't know if this answers your question or not, but I tend to see everything through the lens of personal responsibility, is discipline. I mean, I think discipline equals freedom, and that's a missing component. I think that just because we can doesn't mean we should. I mean, you mentioned the China example of TikTok. I mean, just because we do have access to all of this nonsense, doesn't mean we should spend our time and our resources and point our children in that direction. I think that we can leverage so much with the use of technology. It's just, again, being disciplined in our approach, and being cognizant of what we should do versus what we can do.
Kathy, what do you think are the 3 things?
I'm sitting here trying to decide. I think a push to change back to teacher training, training teachers into becoming facilitators. They're no longer the expert of knowledge anymore. Our technology has taken, you can't be an expert in anything anymore. It's too much out there. But you have to be an expert in how to facilitate students to access learning, and then how to apply what it is using common sense, using problem-solving skills, those types of things. So the lowest hanging fruit there is looking very hard at our teacher training program and how do we shift that to start infiltrating the change in our school system. I mean, we've built this over, 200 years or whatever. So it's not going to, you just can't flip a switch. So you got to start. I think that's because then you're retraining teachers every time they come out. It needs to start back here. And we also need to start having the customer first mentality with our school systems.
This has been an absolutely fantastic, fun time talking about education on West Virginia right now with Chris Miller and Wes Thompson. We've had some great guests. We've had Dr. Kathy D'Antoni, and we've also had Andrea Garrett-Kiesling here with us. It's been a lot of fun, and something tells me that this might just be the first of a couple of these because this has been a great experience for me. I've learned a ton, and it's a very, very, very important topic, and I don't think that we've covered everything that we should yet.
I bet we didn't even scratch the surface.
I think that's right.
Or maybe we did. Maybe we scratched the surface.
I think we scratched it.
We did.
We did. We scratched it.
You know what? Fair. We scratched the surface.
There's a lot more. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Wes.
Thank you guys.
Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.